Monster Hunter Stories 3 Twisted Reflection is sick. So, for those of you who have maybe only played mainline Monster Hunter games like me, and this is your first step into the Stories sub-series, let me paint a picture for you. So I don't want to oversimplify things necessarily, but Monster Hunter Stories is basically a turn-based version of Monster Hunter. There is a twist to it. There is a very big twist, which comes in the form of monsties, or monsters. They're called monsties in the game. I really don't like calling them monsties. It just doesn't, I don't know. You got like a giant Rathalos following you around, and you're like, oh, that's my monstie. And it's like, man, it's a little intimidating.
This is unbelievable! This little critter's gonna be the rarest monstie around!
So you have these monsters and you are able to control them, but you also engage in combat yourself. And there are a lot of Monster Hunter staples there. Like there are different weapons, and those different weapons have different effects depending on what monster you're hunting, where you're hitting it, and they have different strategies. For instance, I've been using the longsword, and similar to the game, you charge spirit by using a specific move, and once you've charged up enough spirit, you can unleash a more powerful attack. The thing is though, is that in Monster Hunter Stories, you get to hold 3 weapons at a time, and you can switch between them during combat. Now, the idea behind this is that while you're fighting a monster, you can quickly swap weapons to target different parts on it in order to break those parts, and different parts are weak to different types of weapons. There are multiple different weapon types, but they all fit into 3 classes. One is blunt, one is sword, and then one is range arrows, bow and arrows and stuff. So that sort of rock, paper, scissors gameplay that people see in Pokemon and other monster tamers is there. I think what makes it a little more interesting though is you have sort of limited control over your monster. Now, obviously you can issue different commands and it'll do those commands, but you also don't need to pick moves for your monster. It'll kind of just do what you last picked or what would be best in that situation. And then there are some other mechanics that fit in there as well that create a very in-depth combat system. And if you've played previous Monster Hunter Stories games, you know what I'm talking about. But I think my major takeaway from that is that Monster Hunter Stories 3 feels deeper than your standard turn-based monster collecting game. Now, as much as I'm enjoying the combat, I think the thing that really ties everything together for me is the flashiness. This game is so cool. All the animations look super slick. It all just feels very, very ambitious, and it seems like there's a lot of care that has gone into a lot of these animations. Now, if you've played other Monster Hunter games, you'll probably recognize some of these animations that the monsters have. However, a lot of these like crazy special attacks that you end up doing are just so cool.
Go ahead. Let's go. Fly! That'll do it.
And you can speed up combat if you think it's moving too slow or if you've seen something too many times, but so far I haven't felt the need to do that because every time I pull it off, it just feels so satisfying. And of course, like other monster taming games, a big component of this is going out and collecting different monsters. And the way you collect these monsters is by going into a den and you pull out an egg from a nest. The eggs are randomly generated. However, they usually stick within a specific pool depending on where you are or what kind of den it is. And then you have to leave the den with the egg in order to keep that monster. The interesting thing is that the more you search for eggs, that increases the odds of a monster rolling into its den and fighting you. If you get into a fight, you lose the egg. Actually catching these things is fairly easy. It is satisfying though when you get a rare egg. There's like this glow that happens as you pull the egg up, and it's a highly potent egg. And the potency kind of determines how good those monsters are once hatched. Even though gathering eggs is somewhat straightforward, at least so far, one of my favorite new additions to this series is habitat restoration. This gives you an in-game reason to release the monsters you've caught out into the wild. So if you get a bunch of Rathian eggs, you hatch them, and you don't really like their stat spread or their genes aren't quite what you're looking for, you can release it, and by releasing it, you increase your ecosystem rank. And the more you release, the higher the rank gets. Eventually you can get it up to S. And what that does is that when you go back to those dens, the chances of getting better monsters improves. So there's this really engaging loop of going out, collecting as many eggs as you can, bringing them back, hatching, raising your rank, going out and collecting more eggs in order to get even better monsters. Now, as someone who plays Pokemon, this excites me for two reasons. First of all, in Pokemon, there's not really a reason to release Pokemon aside from freeing up space in storage. And it can also be very difficult to track down Pokemon with good stats. Monster Hunter Stories 3 solves this in a 1-2 punch. You can collect monsters, if you don't like them, release them, that'll yield better monsters in the future. From what I can tell, you can do this to multiple different regions throughout the game, although I'm still only really in the first region because I haven't actually been doing much of the story, because once this unlocked, I was just constantly collecting new eggs to raise my ecosystem rank as much as I could. And now I have a roster of really good monsters right out of the gate, which I think is really cool.
Without him, without my Monstie, I never would have made the cut.
And of course, this is called Monster Hunter Stories after all, so there is more of an emphasis on story compared to other Monster Hunter games, and based on what I've played, I'm very invested in the story so far. There's a very intriguing setup, and so far I'm really enjoying getting to know all these different characters. Many of them will join your party throughout the game, so as you complete different quests, or as you do their side stories, they'll sub in and you can kind of see what monsters they're using, how they play, and I think their designs are great as well. I will say I don't want to get too carried away on the story just yet, because like I said, I'm not very far into it, things could change, but so far I'm invested, I'm excited to see where it goes, which I would say is a big difference from Monster Hunter Wilds. That story, I wouldn't say I hated it, but it felt very tertiary. It didn't really feel like there was much of a reason to engage with it, especially that co-op nature. You kind of just wanted to rush through it so you could play with friends, hunt high-level monsters, that sort of thing. And finally, the last thing I want to talk about are the visuals. Now, I already talked about how much I like the characters. I think the way they look is incredible. The character creator, it's not super detailed, but I think there's just enough there to make pretty cool characters of your own. And I also really, really like the art style here. I was looking back on some older Monster Hunter Stories games, and while I don't think those art styles were bad, they didn't really do anything for me. This sounds harsh, but I would say they kind of feel like spin-off graphics. It doesn't have the same level of detail and fidelity that the mainline franchise has. Monster Hunter Stories 3, I feel like steps up in a big way. The cutscenes look amazing, the characters look amazing, the monsters look incredible. I really like just generally how it looks. Now that said, I have been playing on Switch and I would say performance feels a little spotty. One thing I like to note though is that when it comes to frame rate, I'm not as picky about that when it comes to turn-based games. Sure, I would much prefer a locked 60 buttery smooth experience, but sometimes that just doesn't happen. And I think with a game like Monster Hunter Stories 3, that lower frame rate doesn't really hinder the gameplay in any way, like it could and did with Monster Hunter Wilds. I've also noticed that the draw distances on some of the vistas can be a little rough. Overall, I would say that's a relatively small issue. I think the style itself that this game has more than makes up for that, and I'd also be really curious to see how this game plays and runs on PC. Like I said, I've only been playing on the Nintendo Switch 2, and I have to imagine PC would look better if there's no other issues unique to PC, which we saw with Monster Hunter Wilds. Anyway, that's how I'm feeling after about 10 hours with Monster Hunter Stories 3 Twisted Reflection. Obviously, things could change as I get further in the game, but as of now, I think it's definitely worth keeping an eye on, especially if you're a Monster Hunter fan who's never tried out the Stories series. I think this might be the perfect entry for you. And for more Monster Hunter, including the review next month, make sure to stay tuned to GameSpot.